Hey everyone, Howard here from IceFlow Studios, coming at you with a more advanced 3D tutorial in Photoshop CS6 Extended. In this video, we're going to be taking this photograph of a pool table and we're going to be adding the missing 8-ball. The result that you're going to see won't be 100% perfect because after all, it'll take days to get a near realistic result, but it's pretty close. And as always, the point of these videos is for you to take away a few tips and tricks to apply them to your own projects. The first step in this project is to create the texture of the 8-ball, which is pretty simple. In the tools bar, I'm going to grab my rectangle tool and draw out a rectangle over the whole document, making sure that the color is set to black. Once that's in place, switch over to the ellipse tool to create a circle in the middle. If you want to make sure that it's constrained to a perfect circle, hold down your Shift key while dragging. For this shape, I'm not going to use a pure white. I'm going to add a touch of yellow so it plays nicely with the lights. And finally, the number. The font is completely up to you, but make sure it's nice and visible in the middle of your circle. Now that the texture is ready to go, in your Layers panel, select all 3 layers, and then head up to the 3D menu, down to New Mesh from Layer, Mesh Preset, and then Sphere. This will take the texture that we just created and wrap it around a 3D sphere. However, it won't be perfect. If I go ahead and click on the newly created sphere and rotate it so we can see the number, it's slightly stretched out. Here's how to deal with that. In your 3D panel, find and click on the sphere's material. That should switch over your Properties panel to display information about your sphere. Right beside Diffuse, click on the icon to the right and choose Edit UV Properties. Now in this window, we want to squeeze the U scale to deal with the stretching. Setting it to around 150% should work quite well. So now that our texture is scaled properly, let's move the ball into place. Clicking on the grid will allow you to move and rotate the camera to better position the ball on the table. One thing I'm going to do first is position the 8-ball over top of the purple ball, which will allow me to scale it properly. Now clicking on the sphere will bring up its controls. The square box in the middle will allow me to scale uniformly. That looks a little bit better. Now I can use the same controls to move the ball back and over either left or right until I'm happy with the position. I can also rotate right from here as well. At this point, the ball might be sitting either above or below the ground plane. If this is the case, under the 3D menu, you can tell Photoshop to snap the current object to the ground plane. That'll ensure that the shadows are displayed properly. So now that the ball is in place, there's an obvious problem. The purple ball should be in front. Luckily, 3D objects in Photoshop CS6 Extended can benefit from masking. Hopping back into your Layers panel, I can add a blank layer mask to this layer. Once added, I'm going to zoom in and grab my elliptical marquee tool and draw out a perfect circle over top of the purple ball. If you want to move the selection while creating it, hold down your spacebar. Now, to make sure that the mask isn't too sharp, feathering might be a good idea. Under the Select and then Modify menu, we can find the feather option. We don't want an extreme feather, so around 0.5 should be fine. Now that the selection is ready, filling it with black will create a mask over top of the purple ball. Perfect, now we're ready to tweak our scene. Selecting the sphere again, let's hop back into the 3D panel and go through some of the key features. The first element I want to tweak is the light. Selecting our light will display its properties as well as the handle on our document. To match our scene's light source, I'm going to rotate the handle back and a little bit to the left until the shadow on the ground plane matches the shadow on the photo. Now in the Properties panel, because we're dealing with a pretty dark object and we're looking for a strong light source, I'm going to increase the intensity of this light to 650%. Then to deal with the harsh shadow, increasing the softness to around 55% should help quite a bit. That looks pretty good. Next, under the Environment section, we're going to add an image for the IBL, or Image-Based Light. This will not only give us a more natural look to our scene, but it's also going to help with reflections and shines. Clicking on the icon to the right will allow us to load in an image. I'm not going to use the exact same image, but a similar image of a pool table. When it loads into your scene, you may see a strong overlay across your document. Once you click off environment, that'll disappear. One more thing before we move on. The shadows on this image are pretty strong. Down under the ground plane section, we can increase the opacity of the shadows on our image. Increasing this to around 85% should match quite well. Now if you were working with an image that contained a shiny surface, you can also add reflections here, but for this project that wouldn't make much sense. Good, now moving into our sphere's material again, we want to boost the shine on the ball. We don't want a dull or matte looking sphere. Somewhere around 90% should look really nice. I'm also going to add a slight reflection, nothing too heavy, but just enough to show the image-based light source that we added a moment ago. 10% should do the trick. And you're going to notice that as I'm tweaking these settings, it's updating live on our document. It's not 100% to what you'll see when we render it, but it's pretty close. Next, I'm going to add a bump to the ball. This is basically a way to give your object texture, which can help heighten realism. Again, clicking on the icon will let me load a new texture. I found a nice scratch texture over at cgtextures.com, which will look really nice. When the texture is loaded, the unrendered preview will look much harsher than it actually is, but I'm still going to reduce the percentage to around 3%. I'm looking for a very subtle texture. So now that we went ahead and tweaked the scene, let's check out what the render looks like. You have to keep in mind that when rendering a 3D scene, the first few passes won't show the final result. Photoshop is layering on certain elements before it gets down and dirty with the detail. When you start to see the render slow down, you know that the detail is coming. The lighting and shadows will start to smooth out, you'll see nice reflections, the bump's texture will start to become more visible, and the overall scene will start to look a lot more attractive. Now that looks okay, but there's something missing. If you look at the other balls on the table, there are strong lights that reflect off of them. These aren't really easy to create in a 3D scene in Photoshop, so we need to fake it. Let me show you a trick. Heading back into our environment properties, click on the icon beside your image-based light and choose Edit Texture. This will allow us to make changes to the image that Photoshop is using for our light source. With the image open, I'm going to add two white rectangles to act as our light boxes. One at the top left of the image, and then another one on the right, just above the midway point. Once the image has been edited, saving it will update our scene. You'll notice that when I switch back to the pool table, you can now see the newly created fake light boxes. Now, if we render our scene again, it should look a lot more believable. And that completes it. Again, these videos are made to pass along tips and tricks so you can use in your own projects. Hopefully you found it helpful. If you want to check out more CS6 tutorials, check out my website, iceflowstudios.com. Take care.